The 2024-2025 Premier League season was actually quite an interesting one, and this was basically for several reasons. And yes, one of those reasons is because Man United nearly got relegated. That is depressing enough for me to think about right now. However, one of the main reasons that the last Premier League season was very interesting was because this was the first time in nearly a decade where Manchester City basically completely fell out of the title picture. So this gave really all the other teams that were in contention their best chance to win a Premier League title in this era, purely because Man City have just dominated the Premier League for like the past 10 years. And really in this, the favourites were both Arsenal and Liverpool, because those two teams have really been the contenders behind Manchester City for the past decade, and everyone else has kind of been there, but they haven't really been good enough to step up to challenge Man City. So yeah, Arsenal and Liverpool going into this season were the two teams alongside Man City, because obviously Man City didn't fall off until partway through the season. And yet, so one of the big problems Liverpool had was that Jurgen Klopp had literally just left the club, and they had a new manager coming in called Arne Slot, and this was going to be his first season. So overall, people didn't really expect Liverpool to kind of jump off and get off to a great start, because obviously when a new manager's coming in, things are going to change in the facility. So you're going to have different coaches, you might have different players coming in and out, and you're going to have different styles as well. You're going to have a different style that this manager is going to want to implement in this team. So the start of the season, I don't think anyone could really properly predict it that well, purely because of Slot coming in and people obviously not knowing how he would cope with the Premier League, with this being one of, if not the most difficult league in the world. However, Liverpool would actually start off the season very, very well, because they would end up getting wins against Ipswich, Brentford and Man United, and even though these weren't the best teams to get wins against, obviously at this point you just want to get off to a good start to actually keep up with Man City, who were doing just as well. However, after this, Liverpool would suffer a shock 1-0 loss to Nottingham Forest, and Nottingham Forest are having their own great season, which they would basically go on to continue for the rest of the season, and they had their own great story. However, with Liverpool losing to Nottingham Forest at this point, a team that people didn't really think would hang on, they really did kind of need to come back from this, and it was obviously a big loss. However, after this loss, they would go on to win their next 4 games, and they would also have a draw to Arsenal. So obviously this team showed a lot of resilience after that shock 1-0 loss to Nottingham Forest, to go on to win your next several games and not really have any problems, and then get a draw against one of the other contending teams. Shows obviously there's a lot of resilience in this Liverpool team, and that they could potentially challenge for a title in Slot's first season. However, in match week 5, in a draw to Arsenal, Rodrigo would go down with an ACL tear, and this is the huge part of the season where people didn't know how Man City would react to this, because obviously Rodrigo is a very big piece in that Manchester City team. So him going down, everyone else obviously smelt blood, and Liverpool and Arsenal would really try and capitalise on this. So after 9 games, Liverpool would be in second place, literally just behind Manchester City. And at this point, because obviously it's been 4 weeks since the Rodrigo ACL tear, Man City were actually going along. They were winning games, but they were actually looking vulnerable at this point. So this was Liverpool's best chance to actually pounce on Manchester City. However, after this, so going into week 10, Man City would lose their first game 2-1 to Bournemouth, and Liverpool would be right on top, taking advantage with a 2-1 win against Brighton of their own. So now obviously Liverpool are top of the table against Man City. Liverpool are top of the table above Man City, and obviously City have been looking quite, not weak, but they've been looking vulnerable. They've been looking very beatable, and now Liverpool have gone above them. From here, Liverpool would go another 26 games until they were beaten again, and this 26 game run including 19 wins and 7 draws. Some of these notable wins were against Aston Villa. They also beat Manchester City twice, and then they also beat Tottenham twice, and another team they beat, an up-and-coming team, they beat Newcastle, which is quite an impressive win because Newcastle have played very well alongside Aston Villa. So some of those very impressive wins to show that Liverpool were rightful kind of toppers of the Premier League table at this point, and their run just solidified them as the best team in the Premier League. However, through this run, they would keep a total of 8 clean sheets, conceding 21 goals and scoring 50, and I think there were a few games in there where they scored like 5 or 6 goals. So outscoring their opponents pretty massively and keeping clean sheets. Liverpool at this point were just on a massive run. It did not look like they could be stopped. And Salah himself, during this 26 game run, would go on an absolute score himself, because he would end up scoring 20 goals and providing 12 assists in that time, whilst I think playing about 1200 minutes. So obviously Salah was having a career season. I think he was like at the age of 33 as well, which for someone of his age, being 33 and being able to do this is incredible, purely because at this point you're expecting players to go on a bit of a decline because they're in their 30s, and physically they're not breaking down, but they're kind of decreasing, if that makes any sense, physically through this time. So after this amazing 26 game run, Liverpool would then clinch the Premier League title with a 5-1 win against Tottenham Hotspur. And obviously Tottenham not that great this season because they were around where Man United were, around the relegation zone. Clinching the Premier League title with a 5-1 win, whoever it's against, is an absolute statement win and an incredible way to do it for Liverpool. But after this, Liverpool would kind of take their foot off the gas a bit, not really that much of a surprise, because then they would have a loss to Fulham and they would start to slow down even more after they lost to both Chelsea and Brighton. And it's not like they were getting hammered or anything, these were close games, but Liverpool were starting to kind of take their foot off the gas and lose to a couple more teams. It doesn't take away, obviously, from the fact they had that incredible 26 game unbeaten run and that they basically just stormed the Premier League for the majority of this season. However, this is most likely because Liverpool at this point had already won the league, obviously taking their foot off the gas a bit, because there's not much to play for, purely because they're out of the Champions League and they're out of the FA Cup, and obviously the Carabao Cup is played, well, the final is played earlier in the year, so they really had nothing to play for at this point. And like I said, this doesn't really take away from their dominance of the season. So some of the stats from like individual players this season, they obviously had the top goal scorer with Mohamed Salah, 29 goals. Diaz also got 13 goals and Gakpo also chipped in with 10 goals. They also had the player with the most assists, which was Salah again with 18 assists, 29 goals, 18 assists. 47 goal involvements in the Premier League is just unheard of, and once again at 33 years old is just something else. They also had Salah with the 8th most minutes with 3,377. Then they also had Van Dijk, who played 3,330 minutes, and Gravenberch played 3,168 minutes. So a few of their players playing the vast majority of the season. And other stats, this time more team-based, they scored 86 goals, which was 14 ahead of Man City. They also got the most wins with 25, and also the most clean sheets overall as a team with 14. And when it came to the end of season awards, at this point, it's no surprise that Liverpool dominated this as well, because they got Young Player of the Season, that going to Ryan Gravenberch, and then Coach of the Season, Arne Slot, which he got in his first season, very, very impressive. And you probably don't need me to say this, but Player of the Season went to Mohamed Salah, obviously. It couldn't go to anyone else because no one else was even on his level this season. He just ran away with it at this point. So from all this, I think it's clear to see that the best team in the Premier League this season were Liverpool, and obviously when Rodrigo ended up going down, that opened the door for Liverpool to just run away with it. And I do think it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if Rodrigo didn't go down with that ACL injury. However, I do think it will be even more interesting next season to see, first of all, if Rodrigo does come back in that season, because I think an ACL tear can take up to like a year to recover, so he might come back partway through the season. I do think it will be interesting to see if his impact on Man City is kind of instant, or if it'll take a while for him to get kind of back into that. And then it will also be interesting to see how Liverpool perform next season, with Slot being in his second season, and sometimes teams will have figured you out a bit more by then. So will Liverpool struggle a bit more, or obviously it could be the same as it was this season, or very, very similar. However, I do think it will be a good thing to see now how Arsenal come back up as well, because if Man City don't get off to the greatest start as well, and more teams have figured out Liverpool, is this a chance now for Arsenal to kind of pounce on that and maybe get themselves a Premier League title? Who knows? So yeah, thank you for listening to the video. If you like the video, leave a like. If you also like this video, consider subscribing to the channel, and also leave a comment down below about what you thought about Liverpool's season this season. So yeah, thank you for listening, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.